education has been called the gateway to the American dream. This is the dream that should be equally afforded to all citizens in this country. The public school system was that passport to accomplishing this dream. Many of the low-income and minority students in the public education system attend low-performing schools that are underfunded and under-resourced. Unfortunately, these funding inequities have contributed to the creation of low-quality education for those students with the greatest need, and thus making the American dream an elusive dream. The daunting reality is that abhorrent funding injustices continue to exist in this country, and too often the schools serving students with the most significant needs receive the fewest resources. The growing consensus is that poverty, socioeconomic status, and inequity in educational resources have led to the continued oppression of minorities. In addition to federal and local funding policies, segregation complicated funding gaps. Laws were passed to discourage segregation, also ushered in new funding policies for schools. In 1972, the Emergency School Aid Act provided federal aid to school districts embarking on desegregation. States that explicitly fought for these segregated policies could not access these funds. But the intrinsic cost of desegregation could not be measured.
As a product of desegregation, and that went from a school that I saw all black teachers, principals, and was in my neighborhood, and to be bused to a whole different area, and everything failed, everything changed. That was traumatic. That was major traumatic. That was a traumatic state. And it was so much so, somewhere or another, we all had to go to summer school to make up what we had missed. Now, I didn't see any white kids in summer school. I saw the little black kids in summer school. Okay, in the long run, you know, I was okay. However, I was one of the unique kids that they thought, well, we're gonna experiment with. We're gonna put you in the white classroom a half a day. And then the other half, you go back to the all black kids. So they was desegregated, but we were segregated within the school. So it was a lot of messy situation, as the young people would say today. What I noticed was, I was a kid, but as I've grown up, it's interesting that you mentioned middle class flight. It almost began to, I teach a psychology class, and the final term paper is on slave mentality. And these kids are coming up with all kind of ways that this is having an impact. So all of a sudden, I was almost taught, well, to be outstanding, you have to be, white-like, not black-like. Oh, the smart kids got to go to the white class for a half a day. So I'm thinking, oh, well, I must be really great because I can be with the white people. With that respect is that, well, I'm smart, and so I'm gonna act smart. And there was a higher level expectation that I need to perform at a higher level. And then whereas what was communicated to the black kids that did not. Okay, you all are not smart enough to be with the other kids, so you just be here and you perform at what we think you should perform. But in the end, it didn't matter if I was in class with the white people half the day or I was still in summer school. I just know that I had to go to summer school like all of the kids that had to go to summer school that was in desegregation. That was the message that I received. Everybody must go to summer school. However, when I got there was only black kids there. Now take it, we were still being shifted way across campus, way across the city of Pine Bluff to go to the white part. Then, so it has a lot of psychological impact. To the point you think, okay, these are the kids, this is the dream, right? This is the dream, everybody together, balanced, basic, but it was just subtle, micro insults. And as I reflect back as a grown man, and I'm going, well, I think desegregation was positive. And then I go, but then there was a lot of negative there. Desegregation took away leaders in the black community. What happened to the principals? What happened to the teachers? What happened to, to the point where, oh, we need black teachers. Well, what happened to those black teachers when they combined the schools? Who got the job? Black people didn't. The white people got their jobs because they combined. You don't need 3 third grade teachers, you only need 2. So it had a negative impact on that because students exemplified the behavior that is modeled to them. I mean, and I saw it was black teachers around me, but at the same time, even as a kid, it felt as if there was a power shift. There was a power shift. There was turmoil in the community about, should this happen? And then it happened, and black people celebrating, yay, we desegregate, and that was great. But then there was the other side, but whoa, you sending your babies into an area that is not welcome them into.
I do think that desegregation has had a negative impact on many of our urban schools. And there are some outliers, of course, and there are going to be outliers in every case. But there's a stigma, unfortunately, that has been attached to brown and black people. And when you leave brown and black people behind who have had a history of being disenfranchised and not having opportunities to build up businesses and build up their communities, then that also has a negative impact on the school system.
Local property tax variation has been blamed as a primary cause of inequities and called for greater state funding as a solution.
For local funding in Tennessee, we have a very unusual situation, and particularly here in Madison County, we have it's even more unusual. What's happening across the country is there are many states where the local school board has taxing authority. So obviously then that means exactly as it sounds. The local school board is saying we can set property tax rates and we are generating revenue for our school district and we have control of the purse. Tennessee is not one of those states. So most states across the country are like that. There are a handful of states that are not like that. So Tennessee is, I guess you could say, unique and in the minority out of the 50 states by saying it's not your school board who sets tax rates and raises money. In fact, the school board has no way to raise money. They must instead go to the local governing body, which in Tennessee is the county commission, and for county public school districts, and ask the county to designate the funds that are then going to the school board. So already in Tennessee, we're a little different because our school boards cannot tax. Specifically in Madison County, we have a funding situation where once our county and city districts were merged in the late 1980s, the city agreed to help fund the combined Jackson-Madison County schools, which is makes us a county district that's unique across the entire state. There's no other county in Tennessee that does that. So think to our west here where you've got Haywood County. The city of Brownsville is not helping pay for schools. And to our south in Chester County, Henderson is not helping pay for schools. It's just the county pays for the schools. That's just standard in the way Tennessee does it. But not in Jackson-Madison County. Our city actually pays part of the money. So we're here very, very locally. If you go all the way down to Jackson-Madison County schools, we're a very unique situation. We're in a state that's not like most other states, and we're in a county that's completely different than all other counties.
According to the National Center for Educational Statistics in 2013-2014, Madison County spent over $4,000 in local revenue per student. The actual funding provided by the County Commission in Madison County fiscal capacity created a deficit of about $214 per student. Multiply this number by the student enrollment and you will get a deficit of over $1 million.
On the local level, the evidence shows there is a I would describe a major funding shortage for Jackson, Madison County schools. And part of what I consider to be shortage is a comparison of what is happening in terms of the county's commitment to fund the local school district compared to what the county could provide in local funding. And that, an initial glance, it sounds like, well, how could you know what the county could do? Well, actually, there's lots of different ways you could know what the county could do. In fact, there's two groups, one in Nashville and one that's housed at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, who calculate a number called fiscal capacity. And fiscal capacity is a measurement of what could the local county be giving per student in terms of funding to the local district. Now, it's not the same measure as what they are giving. These are actually two different measures. So one's a projection of what could they give, and that means, based on the property tax available, the property base rather that could be taxed, the sales tax revenue that comes in, that kind of stuff. So the first part is what could the county be giving? It's called fiscal capacity. The other then is a measurement of what are they actually giving, and then obviously then you subtract the two to figure out, are they giving more or are they giving less? In Jackson, Madison County, our county commission gives far less than what they could give.
The nation's prosperity and future growth depends heavily on the quality of its schools. Increasing financial funding could help K-12 schools implement improvements such as hiring and retaining quality teachers, reducing class sizes, and expanding the availability of a rigorous early education program. The problem is that some states have focused on less funding for education for over the last decade. These cuts jeopardize the school's capacity to develop an intelligent and creative generation of employees.
I think what's happening in some of our urban schools is we don't yet have this broad and consistent approach to bring the level of instruction up to where it needs to be. What I'm seeing is pockets of reasons to be optimistic. So, in Shelby County schools, for example, the Memphis area, they have the iZone initiative, the Achievement School District, and there's some other things that are happening in different places outside of Tennessee. And so there's certain things you look at and you say, oh, this charter school is working, this type of public school is raising scores. But I don't think yet we've hit on anything that is broadly helping all schools. We've just only are seeing some little pockets that we haven't yet figured out how to replicate for everybody.
Primarily because students are in the urban environment is they have parents that do not have the educational level that they may perceive as important. Many parents go, well, I wasn't good in math. So they expect their child not to be good in math. Oh, I didn't like school. Well, then their child don't like school. So it's elevated. So then you have, in an urban environment, you have this excuse game. There's a high level of expectation, or a low level of expectation. The teachers don't think, oh, well, I don't expect much out of this minority student. And they act accordingly. If a student missed something, or missed a class, missing days, or failed a test, they would go, oh, well, I expect that. That's within the norm. Okay. Then on the other end, the parents would basically, the higher your level of education, the more important you feel that education is. And I think education is one that is generational. It builds from one generation to the next generation. So if I have a 6th grade education, I might feel as if my child should only need a 6th grade education. If I have a high school education, I'm thinking I want my child to graduate from high school. If I have a college education, then I'm striving for my child to have a college education. And then that being the case, now it's important for you to know 9th through 12th grade, every grade count, ACT, prep work, investing in the child, monitoring the child, education and attainment, going to teacher-parent meetings and being a part of the school. So when those things are not there, and generally that's the impact of that urban, those pieces are not there. And then ultimately, as a dean of students here, I would say, you have this excuse thing happening. Now you have an excuse for failure, you have an excuse for the lack of civility, you have an excuse for everything. It's nobody's fault but the other person. The teachers are pointing at the parents are pointing at the teacher, and the student is going, hey, I have a free ride. My own personal perspective, because I really believe that family and the parent are the primary educators, I think it began in the breakdown with the parent. I think parents need to understand and demand academic excellence from the school. When the parents are not going to conferences, they're not concerned about school board meetings, they're not concerned about anything related educationally, with the exception perhaps athletic programs, that's a problem. Now, parents are greatly involved in going to basketball, football, track meets, my child. But you look at your child in these athletic programs, how much time are they consuming? You know, morning practices, evening practices, weekend practices. But at the same time, how much time are they taking with their study of their academic work? So, and that's the other side. The coaches using these students, they want to be successful, you know, and now they've communicated to our black kids, all you need to do is work out physically, work hard, and you're going to do well. For me, they're not focusing on, if you want to go to college, you need to do well academically, you need to take an ACT and make you NCAA compliant. You know, you have to have at least an 18 on ACT, you have to have a 2.3 or 2.5. They're not concerned about that. Right now, the school system would say, you can really play football, athletic program under a 2.0, but you can't graduate with that. Motivate and educate these parents. We have to motivate and educate and hold accountable the teachers and the school system. If we do not hold both sides accountable, then everybody get a free pass. And who are the victims? The students. And then these students that didn't do well academically, I would say do not strive for achievement and academic excellence. That's a whole generation. Now they bringing up a generation and another generation and another generation. So it's almost like it would have to be a cultural shift, a cultural change to go, yes, you can do this. And some of the experiences I have had is to take students that basically did not experience academic excellence, however have potential, and turn that learner on and say, you can do this. Failure is not an option. You can do this. You are descendants of kings and queens. Don't tell me you can't do math, because our people created math. There's an achievement gap with marginalized students because just the term marginalized. Marginalization occurs when there's no support. And there's a theory called marginalization and mattering. Okay, marginalization and mattering indicates that you can decrease the impact of marginalization by creating a mattering environment, and that is caring, communicating that the student matters, that so much so that I am going to hold you accountable for your failures. I'm going to celebrate your achievements, but you matter. You matter so much that I'm going to personally spend time with you to assure that you are successful, to develop a trusting relationship that decreases the impact of marginalization.
Some of the challenges facing urban schools, teachers, and school districts are basically all related to funding. They're funding related. Every day when you pick up the newspaper, you read articles about a decrease in funding for local school districts. And we also know that a lot of the funding is related to the funding base in that particular area. So the family incomes can have an effect in some areas on how much money the schools receive for infrastructure, although it might not affect other aspects of the funding base. So funding is basically one of the biggest challenges that urban school districts are facing. And a shortage of teachers, but I think that's interrelated with funding. So we need to increase teacher salaries.
Probably one of the greatest challenges facing our urban schools is what's happening with a lack of support at home. So I know that inside the school building there are challenges, but so much of what's happening is what's being brought based on the student's background, perhaps, for example, a lack of exposure to early literacy in the home, and some things that are carryover effect that the school then has to find a way to compensate for. And so what this is doing is creating where it's much more difficult to educate students who come from underprivileged backgrounds because they simply haven't had the normal structure or support that we're expecting a student to bring, even starting with bringing in, for example, at the 4-year-old pre-kindergarten level. So the effects on the school districts of being underfunded would be that they have to make some really tough choices. So they're in a situation where they actually are needing more resources to serve an underprivileged population, which by nature is needier in terms of the resources of the district. And yet, if the district is being underfunded, then what's happening is they have to make some tough choices, and they can't provide all the personnel that's really needed in terms of staffing. They can't provide maybe some of the access to technology, some of the curriculum. We have a thing going on, a dynamic here in Jackson-Madison County that exasperates the situation in that many of our families have chosen private school options in the area instead of being part of the public schools. But only a certain population goes to private school, and this is an overgeneralization, but it's families who have the means. I mean, these are tuition-generated schools, so it's families who are paying to go to school. The average rate here locally is about $10,000 a student. So you've got a family who can pay $10,000 a student to send them to a private school, and that's not counting all the other costs that go along with sending your kid to private school. It adds up quickly. So you have a certain clientele in the county that's leaving the public schools to choose a private school option. Well, what's happening when they leave is they're no longer part of the average daily membership of that district, which means they're no longer getting funding in the local schools for that student. And so there's less dollars going to the local school district, but the local school district has in it the neediest students who didn't have an opportunity to go anywhere like a private school. So what's happening is there's less money, but it's actually a needier group of kids left in the public schools, and what just was bad was now made worse.
I think one of the reasons why urban schools are failing our most marginalized student population is because parents in those areas are overburdened. They have other things they have to focus on, like making certain that their children have food, that they have housing, and sometimes they can't be as active in their child's education as they would like to. So maybe they can't attend the parent-teacher conferences. Maybe they can't, they don't have time to write letters to their state representatives. And unfortunately, those who are at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder then sometimes are the ones who are the most likely to be left behind.
At home, there was an expectation of academic excellence. I think we might be missing that now in some families.
As time passed, more and more people left their local communities for the allure of major cities and eventually to the suburbs. This shift to the suburbs also shifted property taxes to the suburbs and the schools located there.
I've lived in a few cities, and so I've watched that happen. I mean, I think there are a couple of things that happen. One is the development of private institutions, and then there is middle class. I've just about stopped saying white flight. It was just like middle class flight to the suburb. Sometimes leaving what might be I guess some might say it's like an economic donut hole that still has the challenge of funding schools where students would attend and be able to achieve at high levels. So, I mean, I don't have a magic wand to wave, but I do have a sense that when schools and students perform at a high level, parents want their students to attend those institutions. And so it behooves all of us to work to ensure that our public schools are successful, because success breeds success. Success attracts success. And while I don't have a just an immediate thought in terms of how we might reverse that trend. I do think that we have good principals. You get good faculty at our institutions, our city urban institutions. Then I think that's going to set us up and set the children up to be successful.
The community is affected by school failure in a number of ways. One, if our elementary and secondary education is not successful, then that affects our pipeline to post-secondary education. So that's one way. A second way is that we know that if we have a well-educated population, they are less likely to engage in criminal activities. A third way that it affects the community is that we again know that an educated community is more likely to contribute positively to the economic infrastructure of that particular community. I think that failing schools definitely has an impact on industries coming to an area and also industries leaving. When corporations are looking for a new place to establish their businesses, they do look at the success of the school systems, not just the elementary and secondary school systems, but they also look to make certain that there's an educated workforce. And then also they know that they are going to have to recruit from that area, and that the individuals that they recruit will be looking for good schools in those neighborhoods. And if they don't have good schools in those neighborhoods, they may not be willing to relocate there.
Connection with community and schooling cannot be understated. So what happens at school is ultimately the fabric of the community, and if not right immediately, it certainly is in the coming years, because elementary students eventually become teenagers who eventually become, the young adults in your community. They become your workforce, they're your economic engine, they're your taxpayer, they're your property owner. And so if we have what is an underprivileged cycle of poverty early, and then the school perhaps being broken as well, can't help correct that, then ultimately what's left is this is what the community is going to look like in the future, because there's nowhere along the way that we could intervene to break the cycle. And really, if you think about it, the only way you could break the cycle is through schools. Like, schools are the only institution in America who could say, here's the cycle of poverty, and we can do something about it. And if schools are not doing something about it, nobody else. I mean, so you've got churches in your community who are playing a potential role in terms of resources. Obviously, they're playing a role in spiritual development, but civic organizations can do a little bit here or there, but nobody is in a position to be as powerful as public schools. I think the long-term effects if the schools do not improve is it's kind of a bleak picture. Like, it's not a positive note to end on. It is it then affects your community, it's your economic driver, it's your overall community development. And so what's going to happen long term is, in any given community where the public school district is just failing, and particularly failing some of the neediest students, then what you're going to have is this overall impact where ultimately families who say, you know, this is not where I want to live anymore, or maybe it's not where I can live. There's perhaps not jobs there anymore. There's not commerce. There's not opportunities. There's not industry, and so it forces then the people who can move to move, and then you're on a downward spiral. Like, how could that community survive under those circumstances? And I think we can look at pockets around West Tennessee, and we can say, once the industry left, and the schools were not able to produce a workforce that would attract new industry, there was no rebounding. I mean, that's just like almost like an old ghost town from the West. It's just, you drive through some towns in West Tennessee and you see the boarded up windows and there's no life downtown anymore, and it's a different era in 2019 than it was even perhaps in the 1980s or 1990s. And a big part of that was the school-community relationship.
How do we support our most marginalized group of students with less money? Schools fail from inadequate funding.
What I think is happening in the school structure is when students are coming to us as educators and they're not ready to learn at the level that we're expecting, then they're already so far behind, and I think we haven't yet figured out what is it that the school's going to have to do in terms of remediation. So, you know, we want a student to come in kindergarten, for example, and we're just expecting that the student would know certain things. You know, they have some early literacy skills, they have some self-help skills, they have some social skills that they would have learned at home. And so when a student lacks those skills, I think we yet, and I'm saying education more broadly, have not figured out what do we have to do to make that up. And so we start out behind, and then the next year we get a little further behind, and the next year we're a little further behind, and we end up with a high school student who just can't make the grade because of this almost like snowball cumulative effect that started really a long time ago. So where school funding issues plays a role, particularly in urban schools where we're serving students who have high need, is that it actually is going to take more money and more resources. So some of that might be support curricularly or with technology, but I think a lot of it is probably just in staffing, the additional personnel needs. And so some of that you're thinking, well, obviously this could be more teachers or more teachers' aides, but even on the, like what you might associate with the social work kind of support, coordinated school health type personnel. And so, you know, we're just not there with funding to provide what some of the most needy schools are going to be asking for and would find sufficient to do what they need to do in terms of educating underprivileged youth. I think school turnaround is possible with the right resources, and I mean, I think it probably has to be all the right factors from top to bottom. It's not just about resources in terms of how much money we're going to give the school. You have to have the right school leader. You have to have the right group of teachers. You have to have the right parental support to be a part of making a difference in a school. So there's a lot of factors. It's being done in places across the country, and so that's evidence that it can be done. It's just, how do we take and replicate that for everybody, because we've not figured that part out yet.
Well, I think it has to be a paradigm shift on a society level to save our kids. The paradigm shift would be critically look at real actions or action items that can have an impact. I think research would suggest mattering has an impact. Research would suggest that if a student can be motivated by someone that kind of looks like them and act like them and concerned about them, they do well academically. I think that society as a whole needs to shift. You know, that way, my dream as an educator, then I should be making in the upper, you know, millions of dollars, not running up and down a football field. Now, society as a whole have more, they appreciate the entertainment. Well, perhaps just a little of that entertainment needs to go, well, we need to train our people to do well. In the meanwhile, while we are failing, not just the urban, but in the major city schools, then every generation is getting weaker and weaker. And so then we falling back as a nation, which we are no longer the number one in education anymore. I think we're about like third now. So fourth or fifth, okay. So we falling back. So as a whole, we need to make this big shift in saying this is important.
I think adequate school funding has a significant impact on the success of a school district. Schools have such a positive impact on students. And we know that a lot of urban schools are doing amazing things with limited resources, but they shouldn't have to. Teachers shouldn't have to use their limited incomes to purchase books and supplies. Those should be automatic for every student. Teachers should not have to work in kind of makeshift classrooms that are in a condition that most of us would describe as deplorable. We've seen those reports, especially in this area. I've seen reports in the Memphis area where they've had to close schools, interrupt education, teaching for several weeks because of the deplorable conditions of the classrooms.
Gifted and talented instructors, they teach gifted and talented students. And so they look like they are heroes. But you need to get these instructors that are the most talented to teach the most challenged. The gifted and talented student gonna make it anyway. So you need money to do these things. You need money to draw people into the urban environment. Because you are in an urban environment, you need to understand you're competing with the big cities and you want to recruit. You do not want your student that graduated down the street, but they are leaving the area for more money. So it does play a major role. The other major role it plays is the equipment and technology that it can provide the students. Money must be provided to create smart classroom, academic environment of caring, counseling, just support, all of those things, teacher prep, student prep, test prep, just a host of things. You need to look at the student holistically, and funding must be provided there. So it may not be, in my mind, it may not be funding, but it may be a priority of how you allocating the funds that you receive. What's the priority here?
It's just a matter of, I would say in some instances, the expectation, the priorities of the community. So I'd say, how does society prioritize? How does the high school prioritize? How does the family prioritize? And so you take any subject area and you take any urban school district, and if that urban school district or urban institution or society prioritize coding, if we prioritize calculus 1, I mean, if we prioritize physics, if we prioritize African literature, I mean, whatever we prioritize and we say these are the priorities of our community, these are the priorities of our society, our students, our children will rise to that. They don't know any different. They don't know at 4 and 5 and when they're starting to say, I mean, you ask them, everybody wants to be a fireman. I mean, but sometime at some point, the goals start to change. Oh, I'd like to be a professional athlete. I'd like to be a rapper. I'd like to be, in entertainment. I mean, so those goals start to change. I mean, that happens as a result of adults' priorities. We don't know anything about the student's grit. We don't know anything about the student's tenacity, verve, resilience. We don't know anything about that kid more than that singular test score, and then we can make some inference about the student's family income. But when you go back 2 generations, or even my parents who all attended those one room schools, and they had one teacher that taught everyone at the church during the week with one potbelly stove in the middle, and those persons went on to become everything because of the expectation. Grandmama and them, Papa and them never learned to read, never got past 3rd grade, but they determined education is important. And so the civil rights generation went to school, fought, marched, and when they got out, they were able to walk into those opportunities because they were ready and they were prepared. I mean, talking about under-resourced, an under-resourced institution. I mean, those were some under-resourced institutions. But the priorities, the expectations of that grandfather who could not read, that though he could not read, he was going to work from sun up to can't see no more so that his child would have an opportunity to learn to read.
Political decisions have systemically undermined this premise regarding funding and resource allocation in urban settings. The underfunding of education at the local, state, and national levels ensure failing urban schools continue the vicious cycle of underperformance, thus fueling the myth of their ineffectiveness.